I have always been haunted by the feeling that I understand more than others, yet cannot make them understand. That is a quote by philosopher Frank Kafka, and that holds a lot of truth. Majority of people, not all, but most, think this way. And when you think this way, you start to almost self-isolate, because if you personally think that you understand more than others, you're always going to feel alone in that thought process, or alone, let's say, in your mind, yearning for someone that understands as much as you. But I think that it's not that one understands more than another, and certainly that can be the case, but it's rather one person understands what that person understands, whereas another person understands what they understand. And we cannot sit and judge others for, let's say, not understanding why certain behaviors or why certain actions are affecting them in certain ways. We have to know that for ourselves, and we cannot force others to understand things, because each person has to put in the work and learn through experiencing life in their own way, to where they can broaden their understanding. So when we try to say that we understand more than most, and then we sit on our high horse, that creates a sort of ego, and I think it actually can be rudimentary to your own growth, because you automatically think that just because you understand more than most, that you don't have to continue broadening your understanding or expanding your awareness or continuing on the path of learning. So I believe that it can be a trap in terms of having this feeling that you understand more than most, but yet you cannot make them understand. It is not your job to make other people understand. You can spread your awareness in what you do know in your understandings of things, and that can either be received or it can be not received by those who you share it with. I think that the better way to go about that is, if you are in that space where you relate to that quote of what Frank Kafka said, is to lead by example. Actions, we know, speak much louder than words. So if you are going to attempt to make someone understand or make people understand, the better way to do it would be through action rather than through your words. I get that I'm sitting here sharing my words, but I'm also putting in the action, and the action speaks very loud. Leading by example has always been something that I've learned from life, that if I'm ever in a situation where people don't necessarily understand, or they don't see it the same way that I see it, rather than forcing them to see it that way, rather than trying to make them understand, you simply lead by example. I believe that that has a lot of strength and power in it, and when you start to lead by example, you don't have to force people to understand. Simply, it will be seen from your actions. So in today's times, where there's a lot of, let's say, self-righteousness and or people thinking that the only way that they perceive the reality, or their understandings in life, are far more aware of these concepts and of what they're aware of, it starts to affect you in a way where that's a negative ego, and you no longer can, let's say, share your understandings. They no longer become authentic and genuine because it comes out of your ego. You start to think that there's nothing more that you can learn from somebody else, that you have the overall understanding of these concepts of life. Therefore, it immediately blunts your growth. I don't think that Frank Kafka, when he said this, was wrong in saying that, I think that it's a valid point, and I'm sure that those of you watching will relate to it. I know personally I can relate to it because I've always thought, oh, why do I understand way more than this person? Or why am I aware of how blatantly obvious we are being lied or manipulated to? Or however falsities are presenting themselves in reality. And that then starts to affect the one that has this thought process. So in order to not allow this to affect your thought process, you do not need to force people to understand things. Simply continue on sharing what it is that you understand, and those that come across your actions or come across your word or whatever it is that you do understand can make that decision themselves if they want to have that understanding. But you do not force people to understand things other than sharing that you have this understanding, and therefore it's up to them in order to understand that. To each their own in life, and the really starting point of it is each individual needs to build an understanding of life, one that can be sustainable enough to where you can move forward with your understanding. You can be more open-minded and not so closed-minded. Otherwise, it's simply a trap to think that I'm cursed to have this awareness that others don't have. And therefore, when you do come across like-minded individuals that are up there with the understanding that you have, your ego that is built up so much might not even be able to accept that these individuals are starting to understand or have experienced the certain things in life that you have also experienced. So in life, you have to learn from life. And what has benefited me personally has been learning lessons from the experiences that I go through and teaching myself how now to move forward. What is the takeaway from this experience? And take that with me to move forward, rather than having an experience forcing me to shut down on my thought processes, on my reasons for why I do what I do. Instead, take what you go through in life, take when somebody else doesn't understand, let's say, as much as you understand, as a learning lesson, rather than feeding that ego of oneself, thinking that you are the overall thinker in that pursuit. Therefore, you can continue on learning. You continue on broadening your understanding of life, rather than sitting in this feeling of being haunted by the fact that you understand more than others. Others will continue on, just like yourself, experiencing life. And if it's in their reality to learn from the life, then they will continue on broadening their expanding. You do not need to make or force people understanding. Thank you guys for listening.